Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole heap of information, sometimes complicated stuff, and boil it down to what you really need to know. The key takeaways, the surprising bits, and hopefully just enough humor to keep it interesting.
Yeah, making it feel like you're really getting the inside scoop.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into a period of history that, well, a lot of us think we know pretty well, but honestly, it's way more complex, and frankly, much more accidental than you probably imagine. We're talking about the Tudor Dynasty.
That's so true. When most people hear Tudor, they probably jump straight to Henry VIII, with his 6 wives, or maybe Elizabeth I, the famous Virgin Queen.
Right, the big names.
But did you know Henry VIII actually started out wanting to be a really loyal Catholic king? Or that Elizabeth here was never, ever supposed to rule?
See? Unexpected stuff right there.
Yeah, the more you dig into it, the more you see their story. Really, the whole 118 years of Tudor rule is just this shocking series of accidents, betrayals, unexpected twists. It nearly fell apart so many times.
It really is a saga, one that completely shaped England. You go from Henry VIII winning that incredibly unlikely victory at Bosworth Field, all the way to Elizabeth's really fiercely debated decision to stay unmarried, the Virgin Queen.
Massive transformation.
So our mission today is basically to cut through all the myths and the noise. We want to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding how this dynasty, which was literally born in bloodshed, ended up transforming England from this medieval kingdom into something much closer to the modern nation-state we'd recognize.
And hopefully you'll get some genuinely surprising facts, compelling details, and maybe a few of those aha moments along the way.
Yeah, let's get into it. This is our deep dive into the Tudors, England on the brink, the Wars of the Roses and the rise of the Tudors. Okay, so let's set the scene for you first, because you really can't understand the Tudors without understanding the absolute chaos they emerged from. Picture England around, say, 1455. It wasn't the powerful, centralized nation we might think of later. Not at all. It was basically teetering on the edge of complete collapse. For 30 years, the country was just gripped by what we call the Wars of the Roses. What was that actually like?
Oh, it was devastating.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just some minor squabble between rival families. It was brutal. A long, drawn-out series of battles, betrayals, political maneuvering, all between these two main branches of the royal Plantagenet family.
The Yorks and the Lancasters?
Exactly. The White Rose of York, the Red Rose of Lancaster.
Yeah.
And those symbols, they weren't just nice emblems. They represented these really deep divisions that just tore England apart. It decimated the nobility, left a whole generation scarred by conflict.
And it wasn't purely a family feud, was it? I mean, beyond the York versus Lancaster rivalry, what were the deeper issues fueling this 30-year conflict?
Yeah, you've hit on something crucial there. It stemmed from much more than just, a family disagreement. At the heart of it, you had a really weak king, Henry VI.
The one with mental health issues?
Precisely. He suffered from these periods of profound mental illness, kind of lapsing into dementia-like confusion, sometimes almost catatonic. And that created this huge power vacuum right at the top.
Which I guess ambitious nobles were just waiting to exploit.
Absolutely. You had these incredibly powerful nobles commanding their own private armies, acting almost like local warlords in their own areas.
Wow.
And on top of that, there were these lingering questions about royal succession, stuff that hadn't really been settled properly since way back with Edward III. So, as battles raged across England, the human cost was just immense.
How bad was it?
Well, some estimates suggest nearly 80% of the English nobility were either killed in battle or financially ruined during this period. It was truly a fractured realm. Loyalty shifted constantly, depending on who won the last battle.
It really sounds like a country just consuming itself from the inside out. And then within that chaos, you get this sort of Yorkist interlude. Edward IV, the Yorkist, he grabs the throne in 1461, loses it briefly in 1470, and then somehow reclaims it in 1471. But his reign wasn't exactly stable either, was it?
Not stable at all. And when he died unexpectedly in 1483, boom, immediate crisis all over again. His brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester.
The future Richard III.
The very same. The man history would later paint as this villain. He took the crown from Edward's young sons, the famous princes in the Tower.
And they just vanished.
They just disappeared under very mysterious circumstances. Their fate is still one of history's great unsolved mysteries.
Now, something I found really fascinating about Richard getting the throne was this specific claim, this kind of bombshell that suddenly came out. Can you tell us a bit more about that? It feels like a key unexpected twist.
Yeah, you're talking about the claim that Edward V's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was actually invalid. That was the bombshell.
Invalid? How?
Well, a priest named Robert Stillington came forward after Edward's death. He claimed that Edward had made a secret contract to marry another woman, Eleanor Butler, before he married Elizabeth.
Wow. Okay.
And if that was true, it meant Edward's children with Elizabeth Woodville were illegitimate, which meant they couldn't inherit the throne.
So this one secret contract, potentially hidden for years, just delegitimizes the heir as a parent. That's a massive turn of events.
It was huge. Now, Stillington's motives, they're debated. He had ties to Richard's notoriously untrustworthy brother, Clarence, who Edward IV had actually executed.
Ah, okay, so maybe not entirely impartial.
Maybe not.
Right.
So whether he was acting out of genuine conscience or political maneuvering, we don't really know. It's a historical puzzle. But regardless, that claim became a powerful justification for Richard III to step in as the quote-unquote proper successor.
It's just wild to think about propaganda, too, and how it shapes our view. We have this enduring image of Richard III, right? The hunchbacked, sinister, ruthless tyrant, thanks largely to Tudor propagandists like Shakespeare.
Oh, absolutely.
How much of that is fair and how much is just, good PR for the guys who beat him?
That's such a critical distinction. While his actions in taking the throne were definitely ruthless, that caricature, the hunchback, the pure evil that was largely created after he was dead and gone, killed by the Tudors.
Makes sense. Write the history books.
It was incredibly effective propaganda. In reality, he was actually quite popular in the north of England. His brother Edward IV had put him in charge up there, trying to heal the divisions from the Wars of the Roses. So yeah, it's a classic case of history being written by the victors.
Okay, so Richard III is on the throne, unpopular with some, maybe popular with others, but definitely controversial. And this sets the stage for this incredibly unlikely figure, Henry Tudor. He doesn't exactly fit the hero mold, does he? His claim to the throne was, well, it was distant, complicated, pretty flimsy, let's be honest. How did he even get in the running?
His story is amazing, really. It starts in Wales, 1457. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, was just 13 years old when he was born.
13.
Yeah. And his father, Edmund Tudor, died before Henry was even born, his royal blood. It came through an illegitimate line, the Beauforts, children of John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford. Now, they had been legitimized by royal decree, but, and this is crucial, they were explicitly barred from the line of succession.
Explicitly barred, so how?
Exactly. For Henry to even think about the throne was a massive long shot, a truly unexpected possibility given the legal situation.
But he had a key figure in his corner, his uncle, Jasper Tudor. He sounds like he was crucial.
Absolutely essential. Jasper basically became a surrogate father to him. After the Yorkists won key battles in the 1460s, the young Henry and Jasper had to flee. They ended up in Brittany, in exile, for 14 long years.
14 years? What was he doing all that time? Just biding his time?
More than just waiting. He was shrewdly gathering supporters, making connections, planning his return, all while constantly trying to avoid capture. Edward IV was relentless, demanding Henry's extradition from Brittany. He saw Henry as the last significant Lancastrian claimant, a real threat.
High stakes, then.
Incredibly high. There's this great story where Henry apparently faked an illness right at the port of St. Malo just as he was about to be handed over. It bought him just enough time for the Duke of Brittany to change his mind. His whole future hung on these moments of, well, luck and quick thinking. Unexpected intervention saved him.
And then finally, the moment arrives. The battle that changes everything. Bosworth Field. August 22nd, 1485. Henry Tudor lands with maybe 5,000 men. A lot of them French mercenaries.
Right.
And he's facing King Richard III's much larger army, maybe 8,000 to 10,000 soldiers. Richard even had the high ground on Ambion Hill. The odds were stacked against Henry, weren't they?
Massively stacked against him. Henry was the clear underdog. He was relying on foreign troops and hoping, praying that local lords would switch sides and support him.
And did they?
That's where the battle turned, dramatically. The powerful Stanley family was key. Henry's stepfather was Lord Thomas Stanley, and his brother was William Stanley. They had brought a large force, maybe 6,000 men, but initially they just stood off to the side watching.
Neutral, it's safe.
Exactly.
Oh.
But then at the critical moment, possibly seeing Richard getting bogged down, they committed their forces to Henry's side. That intervention just overwhelmed Richard's army. It tipped the scales decisively.
So it really was this 11th hour switch that sealed Richard's fate. And Richard, seeing it all fall apart, he didn't flee.
No. True to his reputation for personal bravery, he made this desperate, almost suicidal charge straight for Henry Tudor himself.
Really? He went right for him.
Yeah, he fought incredibly bravely, actually killed Henry's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon, and got within just feet of Henry. But he was surrounded, pulled from his horse and killed. Hacked down. The last English king to die in battle. A really shocking, violent end.
And then that incredible image. Right there on the battlefield, amidst the chaos in the bodies, Lord Stanley supposedly finds Richard's circlet, his crown, maybe in a hawthorn bush, maybe taken from Richard's body.
The accounts vary, yeah.
And places it directly on Henry Tudor's head, an instant coronation, signaling the end of one era, the violent birth of another.
It was the ultimate accidental coronation, really, born out of pure battlefield chaos. And speaking of that moment, connecting the past to the present, isn't it amazing that in 2012 they found Richard III's actual remains?
Under a parking lot in Leicester.
Exactly. And his skeleton confirmed so much. The scoliosis, not quite a hunchback, but a severe spinal curve. The numerous battle wounds, including the fatal blows to the head. It was this incredible archaeological epilogue. It physically marked the end of Plantagenet rule and the very beginning of the Tudor age. A tangible link to that pivotal, bloody day, just hidden beneath our feet for centuries. 2. Henry VII, the wise builder of a modern nation, 1485 to 1509. So when Henry VII picks up that crown on Bosworth Field in 1485, England is just exhausted. 30 years of civil war had left the country broken, financially ruined, deeply divided.
Ready for something different, you'd imagine.
Definitely. But Henry's approach was unique. Unlike previous kings who'd seize power and then immediately launch into lavish tournaments or military campaigns to prove their might, Henry did the opposite. He focused on patient, careful rebuilding. It was almost unkingly for the time, a radical departure from those chivalric ideals.
That's a really key insight. So instead of grand gestures, what were his first practical steps? How did he secure this ground that was still pretty precarious?
He moved fast and very cleverly. His very first action was legally brilliant, if ruthless. He declared his reign officially began the day before the Battle of Bosworth.
The day before? How does that work?
It meant that legally, anyone who fought against him at Bosworth was guilty of treason, which gave him the right to seize their lands and their wealth. Instant financial boost and removal of potential enemies.
Wow, okay. Cunning. And then the move that really cemented his position, the one that symbolically ended the Wars of the Roses, marrying Elizabeth of York.
Oh, absolutely. Marrying Elizabeth, the daughter of the Yorkist King Edward IV, was a political masterstroke. It united the warring houses Lancaster and York and created this new dynasty, the Tudors, visually represented by the Tudor rose, combining the red and the white.
Not a powerful symbol.
Hugely powerful. And what's often missed is, well, royal marriages that were usually just political deals. But by all accounts, Henry and Elizabeth's marriage wasn't just political. It became a genuinely successful and affectionate partnership. They seemed to truly respect and care for each other, which was quite unusual.
And he really pushed that unity symbol, didn't he? The Tudor rose started appearing everywhere. Buildings, documents, clothes. A constant reminder. The wars are over, new era. He even used a red dragon standard at Bosworth. Sounds almost mythical.
It does, and that was completely intentional. The red dragon linked him to Wales, to ancient Welsh prophecies, even to Arthurian legend. It appealed to both Welsh pride, his own background, and English sensibilities, giving his rather shaky claim a sense of ancient, almost fated legitimacy.
His political maneuvering also extended to that tricky issue of Edward V's sons, the princes in the Tower. How did Henry VII handle their legacy without stirring up old Yorkist sympathies?
Very carefully. He ordered all documents relating to their alleged illegitimacy, the basis for Richard III taking the throne, to be destroyed.
Bearing the evidence.
Essentially, yes. This subtly implied that Edward V had been the true king, and therefore Richard III was a usurper and a regicide, which, in turn, reinforced Henry's own legitimacy as the one who rightfully overthrew the tyrant, while conveniently erasing the awkward questions about the succession raised by that pre-contract story.
Okay, so he's consolidating power symbolically and legally, but his biggest immediate problem must have been the nobility. These powerful lords still had private armies, many had Yorkist loyalties. Sounds like a recipe for more war. How did Henry, who wanted peace and stability, deal with them without just fighting endless battles?
He came up with something ingenious and profoundly unchivalric again, a system of bonds and recognizances.
Bonds and what now?
Recognizances. Basically, they were financial guarantees of good behavior. Nobles had to sign these legal agreements, promising to pay absolutely enormous sums of money to the crown if they stepped out of line, if they rebelled, or even just maintained too many illegal private soldiers called retainers.
So like a massive good behavior deposit?
Exactly. For example, one nobleman, Lord Burgavany, got slapped with a recognizance of £70,000 for keeping illegal retainers. That's millions in today's money. This system meant potential troublemakers had a stark choice: stay loyal or face utter financial ruin. It was a brilliant way to control them without constant military confrontation.
He hit them in the wallet. Clever. He also set up the court and star chamber. That name sounds a bit sinister, doesn't it? Like something out of a dark fantasy novel.
It does have that ring to it now, yeah. But under Henry VII, its main purpose was actually to provide justice, especially against the powerful. It was a special court operating directly under the king's authority, bypassing the normal local courts where powerful nobles might intimidate juries or judges.
Ah, so it leveled the playing field a bit.
In theory, yes. While later Tudors, especially Henry VIII and Elizabeth, did use it more oppressively, Henry VIII mainly used it to ensure that powerful lords couldn't escape justice and that common people could get a hearing against them. It was a key tool for centralizing royal power and enforcing the rule of law across the whole country.
And instead of pouring money into expensive foreign wars like so many kings before him, Henry focused on diplomacy, right? Strategic marriages and alliances.
Precisely. Wars had drained England for decades. Henry preferred peace through diplomacy. In 1501, his eldest son, Arthur, married Catherine of Aragon. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, the powerhouse monarchs. This alliance brought England valuable trade benefits and, crucially, protection against France.
Smart move.
And he also arranged for his daughter, Margaret, to marry King James V of Scotland. He was thinking long-term, stability, dynastic security, keeping the borders quiet rather than chasing short-term military glory that cost a fortune.
Now, he also relied on some rather unpopular administrators, didn't he? Men like Edmund Dudley and Richard Empson. They revived old, unenforced laws, mainly to levy fines and seize land for the crown. That sounds like it wouldn't win him many friends.
Oh, it definitely didn't. Dudley and Empson were widely hated. Their methods basically amounted to legal extortion. But it was incredibly effective. It made the crown financially self-sufficient, independent from needing Parliament to grant taxes all the time.
Why was that so important?
This approach was influenced by thinkers like Sir John Fortescue, who argued that for a king to be truly powerful and prevent civil war, he needed his own sources of wealth, independent of Parliament and the nobility. Henry limited his court spending, micromanaged the finances. It was all about consolidating power in the crown. It created a kind of royal absolutism, financially speaking, even before that became common elsewhere in Europe. This financial independence was revolutionary for an English king.
And his personal attention to finance was legendary. You mentioned he kept detailed account books, tracking expenses down to the last penny, payments for strawberries, his court full, even food for the royal monkeys. It seems almost endearingly obsessive for such a calculating king.
It does, but that meticulous attention to detail paid off massively. He inherited a treasury that was virtually bankrupt. By the time he died, it contained somewhere around 1.5 million, an absolutely enormous sum for the time. He literally built the financial foundation for the entire Tudor dynasty, providing the stability his successors would rely on and often squander.
So he was this quiet administrative genius, really. Effective, but maybe not very exciting compared to his son.
Exactly. His success often gets overlooked because it wasn't flashy. But it was arguably more transformative in the long run.
But even with all this careful management, he still faced threats, didn't he? Especially from pretenders trying to claim the throne. There was Lambert Simnel, a boy impersonating the Earl of Warwick.
Yes, in 1487, Simnel actually gathered significant support, especially in Ireland, and landed in England with an army. Henry defeated them fairly easily at the Battle of Stokefield.
And what did he do with Simnel? Execute him?
No, and this is another clever move. Instead of making him a martyr, Henry recognized he was just a pawn, so he pardoned Simnel and gave him a job in the royal kitchens.
Seriously? From pretender king to kitchen boy.
Yep. It brilliantly highlighted how absurd the rebellion was and showed Henry's confidence and mercy. Simnel apparently worked his way up and later became a royal falconer.
That's incredible. But then came Perkin Warbeck. He claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, one of the princes in the Tower who had disappeared. That must have been a much more serious threat, given the mystery surrounding the real princes.
Much, much more serious. Because nobody knew for sure what had happened to the princes, Warbeck's claim had more plausibility. He gained support from foreign powers, Scotland, the Holy Roman Empire, France at times. He even landed in England and sparked a rebellion in Cornwall. It took Henry years to finally deal with him.
How did it end?
Henry eventually captured Warbeck in 1497. He initially kept him at court, but after Warbeck tried to escape, Henry had him executed in 1499. These challenges really showed just how fragile Henry's hold on the throne still felt, even years after Bosworth.
And alongside Warbeck, Henry also dealt with the actual Earl of Warwick, didn't he? The son of Edward V's brother, Clarence.
Yes. The poor Earl of Warwick had been imprisoned in the Tower since he was a boy, simply because he was the last known male Yorkist claimant with a direct line. In 1499, around the same time as Warbeck's execution, Henry had Warwick executed too, likely on trumped-up charges of plotting with Warbeck. It was a ruthless act of dynastic security, removing the last potential figurehead for Yorkist plots.
So while Henry VII often gets painted as maybe a bit tyrannical, certainly ruthless and avaricious, you're saying his pragmatism was really born out of necessity. Securing the throne after decades of brutal civil war absolutely required him to weaken the nobles and strengthen the crown.
I think that's fair. His actions were logical, maybe even essential given the political chaos England had just endured. He wasn't necessarily liked for his methods. Dudley and Empson were executed almost immediately after Henry VII died. That's how unpopular they were. But he did bring the Wars of the Roses to an end. He passed on a stronger, more stable government and a healthy treasury to his son. In many ways, he was perhaps the most successful Tudor monarch, even if he won little praise for it at the time. His reign really shows how quiet, sometimes ruthless efficiency can be more transformative than all the grand, glorious gestures. Third, Henry VIII, Renaissance prince to Reformation catalyst, 1509 to 1547.
Okay, so Henry VII, the careful, calculating, maybe slightly dull builder king, dies in 1509, and inheriting the throne is his son, Henry VIII. Talk about a contrast. He's just 17, tall, athletic, charismatic, seemingly the polar opposite of his cautious father. How did England react to this new golden boy king?
Oh, London basically exploded with celebration.
Well,
After decades of his father's financial restraint and, let's face it, rather dull court, Henry VIII immediately signaled a totally new era.
Yeah.
Youthful energy, lavish spending.
He opened the purse strings.
Wide open. He released political prisoners his father had locked up, distributed money, planned these huge grand tournaments. He wanted glory. He wanted to live up to those chivalric ideals his father had sort of ignored. He even jousted himself under romantic names like Sir Loyalheart. He was exactly the kind of glamorous king the public loves.
And he wasn't just a jock king either, was he? I mean, he was incredibly well educated, fluent in Latin and French, trained in maths, astronomy, theology. He even composed music. Pastime with good company is his, right? Sounds like a proper Renaissance prince.
He absolutely was a true polymath. His intellectual curiosity was just as strong as his physical prowess. He was over 6 feet tall, which was very tall for the time, a great wrestler, archer, horseman, brilliant at jousting. Foreign ambassadors genuinely raved about him. The handsomest prince in Christendom, they called him. Auburn hair, fair skin.
Quite the package.
And musically gifted, too. Owned nearly 20 instruments. Played many, lute, virginals, organ. He actively participated in government early on, patronized humanists like Thomas More and Erasmus. He really seemed like the ideal modern ruler, admired right across Europe.
But this golden boy wasn't content with just courtly pursuits. He had that quest for glory. And that meant military ambitions, right? He wanted to revive those old English claims to the French throne pretty quickly.
Yeah, almost immediately. In 1513, he led this big army, maybe 30,000 men, across the English Channel. They had some success, notably the Battle of the Spurs, though that was more of a skirmish where the French cavalry just retreated quickly.
But Tudor PR made it sound bigger.
Oh, definitely, inflated into a major victory. But these campaigns were hugely expensive. They started draining that healthy treasury his father had so carefully built up. It showed a very different attitude to royal finances right from the start.
And while Henry was off chasing glory in France, his wife, Catherine of Aragon, was dealing with a much more serious threat back home, wasn't she? Scotland invaded.
Yes. James V of Scotland, Henry's brother-in-law, but always an opportunistic enemy, saw his chance while Henry was away and invaded northern England. Catherine stepped up brilliantly as regent.
What'd she do?
Despite being pregnant at the time, she organized the English defenses. There are accounts of her appearing before the troops in armor, giving these rousing speeches like a real warrior queen. And her efforts paid off. On September 9th, 1513, English forces crushed the Scots at the Battle of Flodden Field.
A major victory.
Huge. King James V himself was killed on the battlefield, along with thousands of Scottish nobles. It secured England's northern border for years, a truly pivotal victory that Henry, off in France, couldn't have managed without Catherine's leadership back home.
Now, behind a lot of Henry's early policy, especially foreign policy, but really most aspects of his government, stood one towering figure, Thomas Wolsey. He had this incredible rise, didn't he? From a butcher's son to basically running the country.
Unprecedented power. Wolsey became Lord Chancellor, a cardinal, even a papal legate, which meant he held supreme authority from the Pope within England. He effectively controlled both church and state.
What was his big achievement?
He skillfully positioned England as this key power broker between the two giants of Europe, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. His most spectacular moment was probably the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520.
Ah, yes, the big party.
Basically, a massive summit meeting with Francis I of France. For 3 weeks, they tried to outdo each other with just incredible displays of wealth, jousting, banquets, music. Henry even had a temporary palace built with glass windows and running water, which was astonishing then.
Did it achieve anything diplomatically?
Honestly, very little that lasted. It was pure spectacle, all about demonstrating power and prestige. Within 2 years, England and France were at war again.
Yeah.
So huge cost, not much substance. Classic Wolsey, maybe classic Henry VIII too.
And then, the issue that would come to dominate everything, the Great Matter. By 1525, Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon for 16 years. They had only one surviving child, a daughter, Mary. For a king obsessed with his dynasty, especially with the Wars of the Roses still a recent memory, this was becoming a massive problem, wasn't it?
Intolerable for him. The Tudor claim was still relatively new, remember. The fear of what might happen without a clear male heir, potentially another civil war, was very real in people's minds, and especially in Henry's.
In Catherine.
Catherine had endured multiple tragic pregnancies, miscarriages, stillbirths, infants who died young. By 1525, she was 40 years old. Realistically, further children seemed unlikely. The pressure on Henry to secure the dynasty with a son was just immense. It became his obsession.
So Henry starts looking for a way out, and he finds this, well, convenient justification in the Bible.
Yeah.
Leviticus, right? About marrying your brother's wife.
Yes, Leviticus 20.21 says that if a man marries his brother's wife, they will remain childless. Catherine had originally been married briefly to Henry's older brother, Arthur, who died young.
So Henry argued his marriage was cursed.
Exactly. He claimed this biblical prohibition explained his lack of sons. Now, the Pope had granted a special dispensation, allowing Henry to marry Catherine in the first place, precisely because of that prior connection to Arthur. But Henry now argued that the Pope didn't have the authority to dispense with God's law, so the dispensation was invalid, and his marriage had been sinful and void from the start.
A neat theological argument, but getting the current Pope, Clement VII, to agree was complicated, wasn't it? Because of politics.
Hugely complicated. Catherine's nephew was Emperor Charles V, the most powerful ruler in Europe, and in 1527, Charles's troops had actually sacked Rome and basically taken Pope Clement VII prisoner.
Ah, so the Pope couldn't easily annul the Emperor's aunt's marriage.
Precisely. It was politically impossible for the Pope to grant Henry's annulment without deeply angering Charles V. So the Pope did what politicians often do. He delayed, he dragged the legal process out for years, probably hoping Henry would lose interest or Catherine might conveniently die.
But Henry didn't lose interest, because by now he'd fallen passionately in love with Anne Boleyn.
Yes, Anne Boleyn, one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting, and crucially, Anne refused to just be Henry's mistress. She insisted on marriage, on being queen. This only hardened Henry's resolve to end his first marriage, whatever it took.
So if the Pope wouldn't act, how did Henry finally break the deadlock?
The breakthrough came thanks to two key advisors. Thomas Cromwell, a brilliant pragmatic lawyer and administrator, came up with a radical solution.
What was it?
Cromwell essentially suggested, why do you need the Pope at all? Why not declare yourself the supreme head of the church in England? Bypass Rome entirely, take control.
Wow, that is radical.
Absolutely revolutionary. And then there was Thomas Cranmer. Henry appointed him Archbishop of Canterbury in 1533. Cranmer, who leaned towards reform, quickly convened a court that declared Henry's marriage to Catherine invalid.
Clearing the way for Anne.
Exactly. By then, Henry had already secretly married Anne Boleyn in January 1533 because she was already pregnant.
And so, just like that, the English Reformation begins. Not really out of deep theological conviction initially, but out of dynastic desperation and royal will. Between 1532 and 1534, Parliament passed act after act severing ties with Rome, culminating in the Act of Supremacy in 1534, making Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. The irony is just incredible, isn't it? Henry, who the Pope had named Defender of the Faith for attacking Luther,
Who's now rejecting papal authority altogether. It's one of history's great ironies. What started as a very personal quest for a male heir accidentally triggered a national religious revolution. Henry's motives were primarily dynastic and political. He wanted control over his marriage, his succession, his kingdom. But the religious changes he unleashed would snowball, going far beyond anything he originally intended, reshaping England's identity forever and creating divisions that would last for centuries.
So Anne Boleyn becomes queen. Her time at the top was famously short and ended tragically. She wasn't just a pretty face, though, was she? She brought French sophistication, Renaissance ideas to the court. What was her real influence?
She was definitely influential, politically intelligent, with strong reformist religious convictions. She actively promoted Protestant reformers and literature at court. She wasn't just a passive player.
She gets married secretly in January 1533, crowned queen in June. But then the baby arrives in September, and it's
a girl, Elizabeth. A healthy baby, but a huge disappointment for Henry, who was pinning everything on getting a son and heir from Anne. This was a massive blow to Anne's standing almost from day one of her queenship. Another unexpected turn after all that effort and upheaval.
And her fall from grace was incredibly swift after that, wasn't it? Why did things go wrong so quickly?
Several factors. Her sharp intelligence and willingness to voice her opinions made powerful enemies at court, including Thomas Cromwell, who had helped her rise, but now saw her as a liability. Her failure to produce the promised male heir was critical, and Henry's eye had already started wandering towards Jane Seymour.
And another lady in waiting, quieter, more demure than Anne.
Exactly. Jane offered a stark contrast to Anne's outspokenness, perhaps seeming like a safer bet for providing a son. Cromwell, seeing the king's favor shift, moved decisively against Anne.
The charges were shocking, weren't they? Adultery, incest with her own brother, plotting the king's death.
Shocking and almost certainly fabricated. In April 1536, these flimsy accusations were brought against her and several men associated with her court circle, including her brother George. Despite the lack of any real evidence, they were all found guilty in sham trials. Anne was executed on Tower Green on May 19, 1536.
With a French swordsman, apparently at her request, a strange sort of mercy.
Yes, a sword was considered quicker and cleaner than the traditional English executioner's axe. A strange mercy indeed.
And just 11 days after Anne's execution, Henry married Jane Seymour. Parliament then passed the Second Succession Act, declaring both Mary and Elizabeth illegitimate. It's just brutal. A clear sign of his ruthlessness and that relentless obsession with getting a legitimate male heir no matter the human cost.
Absolutely brutal. And 1536 was a pivotal year in another way, too. It was the year Thomas Cromwell launched the dissolution of the monasteries.
Right, this massive seizure of church property. How big was it?
Huge. Over 800 monasteries, nunneries, and friaries were closed down over the next few years. These institutions controlled maybe a quarter of all the landed wealth in England. It was the largest single transfer of property in English history since the Norman Conquest.
The official reasons given were things like corruption and moral failings among the monks and nuns, but historians are pretty skeptical about that being the main driver, aren't they?
Very skeptical. While some monasteries certainly had problems, the primary motivations were almost certainly ideological and financial. Protestant reformers opposed the whole idea of monasticism, and for Henry, it represented an absolutely enormous financial windfall. He needed money for his wars and palaces.
What was the impact beyond the financial? This must have caused huge social disruption.
Massive disruption. Monasteries weren't just places of prayer. They were vital parts of the local community. They provided education, health care for the sick and elderly, charity for the poor, often employment and hospitality. Their closure left huge gaps in the social safety net.
And the loss of knowledge. Their libraries.
An incalculable tragedy. Thousands upon thousands of irreplaceable medieval manuscripts and books were lost or destroyed, just scattered to the winds. A huge cultural loss for England.
This didn't go unchallenged, surely. Such a massive change must have provoked resistance.
Oh, it provoked the largest popular uprising of the entire Tudor period, the Pilgrimage of Grace. In October 1536, tens of thousands of people, maybe 30,000 or more, mainly from the north of England, marched under the banner of the 5 Wounds of Christ.
What were they demanding?
Primarily, the restoration of the monasteries and a return to the old religion. They also had other grievances about taxes and Cromwell's influence. It was a huge challenge to Henry's authority.
How did Henry handle such a massive rebellion?
Initially, quite shrewdly, he negotiated. He met with the rebel leader, Robert Aske, promised pardons, even hinted at concessions, which was quite an unexpected turn for him. The rebels, trusting the king's word, dispersed peacefully.
But Henry didn't keep his word.
Not really. Once the immediate threat was gone, and after some smaller secondary uprisings broke out, Henry unleashed brutal reprisals. Aske and hundreds of other leaders were rounded up and executed. It sent a terrifying message.
And the financial benefit for Henry, was it worth it?
Financially, it was staggering at first. The seized assets brought in an estimated £90,000 a year in income for the crown. That's hundreds of millions in today's terms, plus the value of the lands and treasures themselves. Henry used it for coastal fortifications against potential invasion, funding wars, building lavish palaces like Nonsuch.
Did the wealth last?
Surprisingly, no. Due to poor financial management, ongoing wars, and Henry's lavish spending, the vast wealth from the monasteries essentially disappeared within about a decade. A huge missed opportunity for long-term investment in the kingdom.
But the dissolution had a deeper, more lasting societal impact, didn't it? It created a whole new class of landowners. How did that change England?
Fundamentally, the crown sold off huge amounts of former church land, often at bargain prices, mainly to the existing gentry and nobility, but also to some rising merchant families. This created a powerful new class of landowners whose wealth and status were now directly tied to the Reformation settlement.
Ah, so they had a vested interest in making sure Catholicism never came back.
Exactly. They wouldn't want to give up their new lands. It bound a whole section of the ruling class directly to the Tudor monarchy and its break from Rome. It helped secure the Reformation at a local level, making a full Catholic restoration much harder in the future. It was a profound, perhaps unintended consequence that solidified the religious changes.
It's interesting, though. Henry breaks from Rome, dissolves the monasteries, yet he himself seemed to hold on to many Catholic beliefs, didn't he? He even persecuted Protestants who went further than he wanted with reforms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is one of the central contradictions of his reign. He rejected papal authority completely, but in terms of doctrine and worship, he remained largely conservative, quite Catholic in his personal beliefs. He enforced doctrines like transubstantiation, upheld clerical celibacy, even though he wasn't celibate, and executed Protestants who denied these things, just as he executed Catholics who denied his supremacy.
So he created this weird hybrid church, neither fully Catholic nor fully Protestant.
Precisely. A Church of England, but not necessarily a fully Protestant one in the way reformers on the continent understood it. This ambiguity, this middle way that wasn't really a settled way at all, would cause immense religious turmoil for his children after his death. It's another example of how the English Reformation wasn't this clean, ideologically driven movement, but a messy, reactive process shaped by Henry's personal needs and political calculations.
Now let's talk about Henry himself in his later years. The transformation from that energetic Renaissance prince to what many describe as a paranoid tyrant is just staggering. By the 1540s, the athletic king could barely move. What happened?
It's a dramatic physical and psychological decline. A key moment seems to be a serious jousting accident he had in 1536. It apparently reopened an old leg wound, which then ulcerated and never properly healed. It caused him constant, agonizing pain for the rest of his life.
And that pain likely affected his personality.
Almost certainly. Chronic pain can make anyone irritable, short-tempered, even paranoid. And his physical transformation was stark. He ballooned in weight, reaching perhaps close to 400 pounds. His waist measurement was recorded as 54 inches. He needed mechanical hoists to get around, special reinforced chairs. Yet reports suggest he continued to eat enormous meals, which obviously didn't help his health.
And his mental state. The paranoia grew.
Definitely. The confident king who once enjoyed theological debates became increasingly suspicious, prone to fits of rage. This paranoia led him to turn against even his most loyal servants, like Thomas Cromwell.
Cromwell, the architect of the break with Rome and the dissolution, fell from grace. Why?
The final straw for Cromwell was arranging Henry's short-lived marriage to the German princess Anne of Cleves in 1540. Henry took an instant dislike to her appearance, finding her much plainer than her flattering portrait suggested. He blamed Cromwell for tricking him into it. Within months, Cromwell was arrested, charged with treason and heresy, and executed without trial. It shows how arbitrary and dangerous Henry had become.
His marital history in these later years also reflects this volatility. Jane Seymour, his third wife, gave him his long-awaited son, Edward, but died just days later from complications of childbirth in 1537.
Yes, the only wife to give him a son, and she died soon after. Then came Anne of Cleves, divorced after just 6 months, the Flanders mare, he unkindly called her.
Then Catherine Howard.
His fifth wife, Catherine Howard, a very young, vivacious girl, but she was foolishly indiscreet about her past relationships and possibly continued affairs after marrying the king. When this came to light, Henry was enraged and humiliated. She was executed for treason in 1542.
Leaving only his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, to survive him. How did she manage it?
Catherine Parr was incredibly intelligent, pious, and careful. She was older, a widow twice over, and knew how to manage a difficult husband. She acted as a compassionate nurse to the ailing, increasingly difficult king. Crucially, she also played a key role in reconciling Henry with his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, persuading him to restore them to the line of succession.
Which was a huge deal, considering he'd declared them both illegitimate earlier.
A massive deal. Her quiet influence provided some much-needed stability and sense in Henry's final, tumultuous years.
But his paranoia wasn't just directed at wives and ministers. He also ruthlessly eliminated anyone with even a distant Plantagenet claim to the throne, didn't he? Like Margaret Pole.
Yes, the elderly Countess of Salisbury, Margaret Pole. She was the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, Edward V's brother. Simply because of her Plantagenet blood, she and her family were seen as potential threats. Her execution in 1541 was particularly gruesome and horrific, cementing Henry's reputation for tyranny in his later years. He was systematically wiping out any potential alternative claimants.
As death approached, though, Henry did try to secure his legacy through his will. He set up a regency council for his young son, Edward. And as you mentioned, thanks partly to Catherine Parr, he put Mary and Elizabeth back in the line of succession after Edward.
Yes, despite having declared them illegitimate, his will placed Mary first after Edward and then Elizabeth after Mary, should Edward die without heirs. It was a pragmatic move, perhaps a reluctant recognition that female rule might be necessary to preserve the Tudor dynasty, despite his lifelong obsession with securing a male line. It shows a flicker of practicality, even amidst the paranoia.
Henry VIII finally died on January 28, 1547. He was 55. Apparently, his final wishes for this magnificent, elaborate tomb were never completed.
That's right. He ended up in a vault at Windsor alongside Jane Seymour, in a relatively modest arrangement compared to his grand plans. A fittingly unfinished end, perhaps, for such a contradictory figure.
His legacy is just so complex, isn't it? How do you even sum it up?
It's incredibly difficult. He transformed England's religious landscape, yet remained personally quite Catholic in belief. He asserted England's independence from foreign authority, but created unprecedented centralized power in the monarchy at home. His desperate pursuit of dynastic security through 6 marriages ultimately failed to establish the stable male line he craved, yet ironically produced 3 remarkably capable monarchs, including 2 of England's most famous queens.
So he left England profoundly changed.
Profoundly. More centralized, diplomatically more significant on the European stage, arguably wealthier due to the church lands, though he squandered much of it, but also religiously divided, and at a huge human cost, executions, rebellions suppressed, social upheaval from the dissolution. He was this larger-than-life force of nature, whose very personal obsessions inadvertently, almost accidentally, sparked a national revolution. 4. Tudor life. Hidden dangers and societal shifts.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the monarchs, the politics, the grand sweep of history. But let's shift focus a bit. What was life actually like for ordinary people, or even the reasonably well-off during this period of massive change? When we see pictures of those, quaint timber-framed Tudor houses, what's hiding behind that picturesque image?
That's a great question, because those houses often hide a real revolution in domestic life, especially for what historians call the middling sort.
Who were they exactly?
Think professionals, skilled artisans, successful yeoman farmers, merchants, people who weren't nobility but were doing pretty well, especially thanks to a growing economy and increased trade during the Tudor period. They started investing heavily in their homes, making them more comfortable, more private. Well, instead of everyone living and sleeping in one big hall, houses started having more separate rooms, parlors, bedrooms upstairs. They bought more furniture, pewter tableware instead of just wood, expensive textile hangings for the walls. It was about displaying their new status and enjoying a bit more comfort and privacy. A quiet revolution happening inside the home.
And with all this new exploration and trade, new things were coming into England, especially food. One item in particular went from being incredibly expensive, a rare luxury, to something more attainable: sugar. White gold, they called it. Sounds wonderful, but you're saying it brought hidden dangers.
Oh, absolutely. Sugar became much more available, partly due to the horrific expansion of slave labor on plantations in the New World, which dramatically lowered production costs. And the Tudors, especially the wealthy, went mad for it.
How did they use it? Just in desserts?
Not just desserts. It was a massive status symbol. At banquets, they'd have these incredibly elaborate sugar sculptures, sometimes called subtleties. They'd even disguise savory foods, making fake bacon out of colored sugar paste, or covering intricate models of castles or animals in sugar. Tudor roses coated in silver leaf made of sugar. It was all about showing off how much sugar the host could afford. Pure, conspicuous consumption.
I can just imagine the sugar rush, that instant energy buzz. But the hidden danger. Well, let's talk about teeth. Dr. Yelena Bakarla did a study on 16th century teeth. What did she find?
She found evidence of extreme tooth decay, agonizing abscesses, even bone loss in the jaw. People were clearly suffering terribly with dental problems, and their attempts at dental hygiene often made things worse.
How? What did they do?
They used toothpicks or rub their teeth with cloths. They also used tooth powders, but these often contained sugar or honey themselves, or abrasive things like ground-up coral or pumice stone, which would just strip away the enamel, leaving teeth even more vulnerable.
So they were basically feeding the bacteria while trying to clean their teeth.
Pretty much. And they had no concept of sugar's addictive nature, how it triggers serotonin release, making you crave more. They were consuming it in quantities that would horrify a modern dentist.
And here's a fact that just blew my mind. By 1592, official records in London, the bills of mortality actually listed teeth as a cause of death. You could die from bad teeth.
Yes, absolutely. An untreated abscess, a severe infection in the mouth, could easily spread internally. Without antibiotics, that infection could get into the bloodstream, damage bones, even affect vital organs like the heart or kidneys. Sepsis from a dental infection was a real killer. So this wonderful new luxury, this white gold, was literally destroying people's health from the inside out in a way they simply didn't understand. A slow, sweet peril.
Wow. Okay, so sugar was dangerous. What about the houses themselves? You mentioned the rise of multi-roomed houses. A key invention enabling that was the chimney, right? Moving the fire from an open hearth in the middle of the room to a fireplace against the wall. Sounds like a great improvement. Warmer, less smoky, allows for an upstairs.
It was a huge improvement for comfort and privacy, definitely. It really did revolutionize domestic architecture. But those early chimneys brought their own quite catastrophic dangers.
Like fire.
Exactly. Frequent devastating fires. Entire towns sometimes burned down. Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's town, burned down twice in the late Tudor, early Stuart period.
Why were early chimneys so dangerous? Weren't they made of brick or stone?
Sometimes, but often the internal structure, especially higher up, or the way they were integrated into timber frames, involved wood. They used wattle and daub woven sticks, plastered with mud, sometimes mixed with flammable materials like straw. These could smolder unnoticed deep inside the chimney structure for hours or even days before bursting into flame.
And they didn't really understand airflow, did they? The concept of draw.
Not properly. So smoke, which is essentially unburnt fuel particles, would often linger in the chimney flue, build up heat, and then suddenly ignite in these intense bursts of flame, shooting out the top like a blowtorch. If you had a thatched roof, which was very common...
Instant ignition.
Exactly. Forensic fire expert Emma Wilson did some fascinating experiments showing just how combustible that trapped chimney smoke is. It's terrifying.
But wait, there's another twist. Dr. Stephen Gunn looked at coroner's reports from the time and found something even more surprising. It wasn't just fire that killed people.
Right. His research showed that more deaths related to chimneys actually came from house collapses than from the fires themselves.
Collapses? How?
Because early brick, which was seen as this amazing, modern, fireproof material, often couldn't actually withstand the intense heat generated by wood or coal fires burning inside the chimney. Temperatures reaching 1,000, maybe 1,200 degrees Celsius. The bricks would crack, sometimes even explode under the thermal stress, and the entire chimney stack could just suddenly crash down through the house, killing people inside, or even people trying to put the fire out from outside.
So the very thing meant to be safer brick had this hidden fatal flaw, another unintended consequence of progress.
Absolutely. It shows how innovation often brings unforeseen risks. People were embracing this new technology without fully understanding its limitations in these extreme conditions.
Did this lead to any changes, regulations?
It did, eventually. These repeated disasters led to some of the very first building regulations and health and safety laws in England. Places like Oxford started bringing in rules in the 1580s, mandating safer materials for chimney construction, like stone or proper brickwork, all the way up, and insisting on regular chimney sweeping to prevent soot buildup. It's a really early example of society learning, slowly and painfully, to manage the risks of new technology.
Okay, so houses could burn down or collapse. What about basic sanitation? You mentioned no running water. That must have had a huge impact on daily life and health.
Profound. Imagine usually the women of the household having to haul heavy buckets of water every single day, often from a communal well or river, just for basic drinking, cooking, washing. Laundry was a massive, back-breaking task done outside, whatever the weather.
And water sources themselves weren't safe. Which leads to another shocking statistic from those coroner's reports. Drowning. You said something like 40% of accidental deaths were drownings, compared to maybe 2% today. That's staggering.
It is staggering. And it wasn't just people falling into deep rivers. People drowned in ponds, ditches, even shallow streams.
Why was it so common? Couldn't people swim?
Swimming wasn't a common skill, especially for ordinary people. But there are physiological reasons, too. Falling into cold water triggers an involuntary gasp reflex cold shock. You would hail water immediately, panic sets in. Plus, they wore heavy wool clothing. Once wet, wool gets incredibly heavy, maybe doubling or tripling in weight. It would just drag you down, making it almost impossible to climb out, especially on slippery, muddy banks. It was a constant, everyday danger.
And general hygiene. Floors covered in rushes, not carpets.
Right. Rushes or straw spread on the floor. And they weren't changed very often. They just accumulate layers of dirt, food scraps, animal waste, human waste, everything. Erasmus famously complained about floors where the bottom layer might have been undisturbed for 20 years. Perfect breeding grounds for bacteria and pests.
Leading to diseases like dysentery, cholera, typhoid, and childbirth must have been incredibly dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. Maternal mortality rates were horrific. Maybe 20 deaths per 1,000 births, possibly higher. Most deaths were due to infection contracted during or after childbirth, puerperal fever or childbed fever. Midwives didn't understand germ theory. Basic hygiene practices were non-existent.
And Tudor medicine in general was pretty limited, wasn't it? Based on the four humors.
Yes. The ancient Greek theory of the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, being in balance for health. Illness was seen as an imbalance, treated with things like bleeding or purging. They relied heavily on herbal remedies, some of which might have worked, but many were ineffective or even toxic, depending on the dose. And there were lots of superstitious beliefs mixed in too, like using a specific type of wart called a pilewort to treat hemorrhoids. Fundamentally, they just didn't understand the real causes of disease bacteria, viruses.
Which brings us to one particularly terrifying disease that emerged in this era. Syphilis. First recorded in Britain around 1497. Horrific symptoms, right?
Truly horrific. Chronic pains, disfiguring ulcers and scabs, eventually bone corruption, neurological damage, madness. It spread rapidly, likely linked to wars and troop movements, and carried an immense social stigma. People would try to hide the facial disfigurement, sometimes wearing false noses made of metal or wood.
And they desperately searched for a cure, which led them to mercury.
Yes, quicksilver. Mercury became the go-to treatment for syphilis for centuries. It was applied in various ways, rubbed onto the skin as an ointment, sometimes even injected, or patients would inhale mercury vapor in confined spaces. There was a popular treatment called Baxter's cream, which contained a shocking 35% elemental mercury.
But mercury is incredibly toxic. This cure was actually a poison.
It was lethal. Elemental mercury is readily absorbed through the skin and lungs. It attacks the nervous system, causing tremors, memory loss, dementia, convulsions, kidney failure, death. The levels people were exposed to, especially through inhaling the vapors, estimated at 2,500 times the modern safe limit, were incredibly dangerous. Many people likely died from the mercury cure rather than the syphilis itself.
Another case of the treatment being worse than the disease. It's a grim picture of the hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface of Tudor life.
It really is. While there was progress and growing prosperity for some, everyday life was fraught with risks they didn't understand, from the food they ate to the houses they lived in to the medicines they took. Effective cures for things like syphilis, based on understanding bacteria and developing antibiotics, were still centuries away. Advances in anatomy, which Henry VIII himself ironically helped by allowing dissections in the 1540s and later the invention of the microscope, would be needed before real medical progress could begin. To feed Edward VI, the Protestant king, 1547 to 1553. So Henry VIII dies in January 1547, and his son, Edward VI, becomes king. He's only 9 years old.
9. inheriting this kingdom that his father had turned upside down, religiously speaking, but hadn't really settled. Still that ambiguous mix of Catholic and Protestant elements.
Exactly. And because Edward was so young, power initially fell to a regency council, dominated first by his maternal uncle, Edward Seymour, who became Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector.
And Seymour, unlike Henry VIII, was a committed Protestant.
Very much so. He and later John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, who overthrew Somerset, were genuinely convinced Protestants. They saw Edward's reign as the opportunity to push the English Reformation much further, far beyond Henry VIII's more limited, politically motivated changes.
So what did they actually do? How did they accelerate the reforms?
They moved quickly and decisively. They dissolved the chantries, these are endowments left, often by wealthy people, to pay priests to say masses for their souls after death. A very Catholic practice. They removed remaining restrictions on reading the Bible in English, and most significantly, they introduced the First Book of Common Prayer in 1549, and then an even more radically Protestant second version in 1552.
What was the significance of the Book of Common Prayer?
It completely standardized worship across England, all in English, replacing the old Latin Mass. It systematically removed Catholic elements. Altars were replaced with communion tables, elaborate vestments were discouraged, prayers to saints were gone. The emphasis shifted heavily towards scripture, preaching, and a more austere form of Protestant worship. It was a top-down religious revolution.
But Edward himself, despite being so young, wasn't just a figurehead, was he? He seems to have been incredibly intelligent and took his role very seriously.
He was remarkable. He kept this detailed personal journal, which still survives. It shows a precocious intellect, a real grasp of politics and theology, and very strong, deeply held Protestant convictions, even from a young age. He was apparently debating complex theological points with bishops when he was barely into his teens.
Writing treatises against the Pope.
Yes, he wrote a treatise arguing against papal supremacy. He firmly rejected Catholic doctrines like transubstantiation. His tutors, who were leading Renaissance humanists, clearly nurtured his intellect and his Protestant faith. He learned Latin, Greek, French. Foreign ambassadors were genuinely impressed by his knowledge and his seriousness. He was definitely showing signs of becoming a very forceful ruler in his own right, potentially another Henry VIII in the making, but a firmly Protestant one.
But these radical changes imposed so quickly, surely they didn't go down well everywhere. Was there resistance?
Oh yes, significant popular resistance, especially in areas that remained strongly conservative and Catholic. The introduction of the first prayer book in 1549 sparked the Prayer Book Rebellion, mainly in Devon and Cornwall. People demanded the return of the Latin Mass and traditional ceremonies.
And there was another major rebellion, too. Kett's Rebellion.
Yes, Kett's Rebellion in Norfolk, also in 1549. That was slightly different. It was driven more by economic grievances, particularly protests against enclosure, the fencing off of common land by wealthy landowners, but it also had religious undertones and challenged the authority of the gentry. Both rebellions showed that while the government in London was pushing hard for Protestantism, much of the country was either resistant or deeply unsettled by the rapid changes.
And how the government handled these rebellions had political consequences too, didn't it? Somerset's approach.
Somerset, the Lord Protector, was seen by some on the council as being too lenient in dealing with the rebels, perhaps too sympathetic to their grievances. This perceived weakness contributed to his downfall later in 1549. He was ousted by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland.
And Northumberland was more ruthless.
Much more ruthless in suppressing dissent. He took control, continued the Protestant reforms, perhaps even more aggressively, and also tried to tackle the serious financial problems the government had inherited from Henry VIII's wars, debased coinage, soaring inflation. He brought in figures like Thomas Gresham, the financier who later founded the Royal Exchange, to try and sort out the mess.
But then tragedy struck. Edward VI, this bright, zealous young king, fell seriously ill in early 1553.
Yes, his health declined rapidly. It was likely tuberculosis, what they called consumption then, and as it became clear he was dying, it created a desperate succession crisis.
Because the next in line, according to Henry VIII's will, was
his elder half-sister Mary, a staunch, unshakable Catholic.
Which for Edward and Northumberland was unthinkable. She'd undo everything.
Exactly. Their entire Protestant revolution would be reversed. So, driven by his religious convictions and heavily influenced by Northumberland, the dying Edward made a desperate, legally questionable move. He drafted a document called the Device for the Succession.
What did it do?
It bypassed both his half-sisters, Mary and the Protestant Elizabeth, arguing they were illegitimate. Instead, it named his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as his heir.
Why Lady Jane Grey?
She had Tudor blood through her mother, Henry VIII's younger sister's granddaughter. Crucially, she was Protestant, and perhaps not coincidentally, she had recently been married off to Northumberland's own son, Guildford Dudley.
Ah, so Northumberland had a very personal stake in this.
A very direct stake in securing the throne for his daughter-in-law. It looks suspiciously like a power grab by Northumberland, using the dying king's religious fervor.
So Edward dies, and Lady Jane Grey is proclaimed queen. Her reign is famously short, the 9 days queen. She didn't even want it, did she?
Not at all. Accounts say she fainted or burst into tears when she was told she was queen. She was apparently forced into it by her ambitious family in Northumberland. But she was, by all accounts, a remarkable young woman in her own right.
Highly educated.
Incredibly so. A brilliant scholar, fluent on Latin, Greek, Hebrew, reading Plato in the original Greek for pleasure. A real product of that humanist education ideal. But completely unsuited and unwilling for the political snake pit she was thrown into. She ruled nominally from the Tower of London for just 9 days.
What went wrong for Northumberland and Jane?
Mary Tudor acted decisively. As soon as she heard of Edward's death and Jane's proclamation, she fled to East Anglia, where she had strong support among the conservative gentry and populace. She raised her standard, proclaimed herself queen, and people flocked to her.
Why did people support Mary over Jane?
Several reasons. Legitimate succession was a powerful principle. People respected Henry VIII's will. There was widespread resentment against Northumberland's perceived ambition and his harsh rule, and many ordinary people were probably tired of the rapid religious changes and preferred Mary's known Catholicism, or at least the promise of stability. Mary marched towards London, gathering support, and Northumberland's regime just collapsed. Jane was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower.
What happened to her? Did Mary execute her immediately?
No, initially Mary showed some clemency towards her young cousin. Jane was kept prisoner, but not immediately condemned. However, Jane's fate was sealed a few months later when her own father, the Duke of Suffolk, foolishly got involved in another rebellion. Wyatt's rebellion against Mary's proposed marriage to Philip of Spain.
That sealed it.
That sealed it. Mary could no longer afford to seem weak. Jane, despite her innocence in the rebellion, was now seen as too dangerous a figurehead. She and her husband, Guildford Dudley, were executed on February 12, 1554. Jane met her end with extraordinary composure and dignity for a teenager. Her story is just tragic. Arguably, the Tudor dynasty's greatest intellectual, sacrificed to the brutal realities of religious conflict and political power struggles. An unexpected, poignant victim of the whole Tudor succession saga. 6. Mary VI, the Catholic Restoration and Bloody Mary, 1553-1558.
So Lady Jane Grey's brief, tragic interlude ends, and Mary Tudor makes her triumphant entry into London in August 1553, cheering crowds, apparently. This must have felt like an incredible moment for her, a profound personal vindication after everything she'd been through.
Absolutely. You have to remember, Mary, the daughter of Henry VIII, and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had endured years of humiliation. Declared illegitimate by her own father, separated from her mother, pressured constantly during Edward VI's reign to renounce her Catholic faith, living under the threat of treason charges. Her accession was vindication. It signaled the start of her great mission to undo the Reformation and restore England to the Catholic Church.
And she didn't waste time, did she? What were her first moves?
She acted methodically, but swiftly. She released imprisoned Catholic bishops, like Stephen Gardiner, and appointed them to key positions. She had Parliament repeal the Protestant legislation passed under Edward VI, and by 1554, Cardinal Reginald Pole arrived as papal legate, formally absolving England and reconciling it with Rome. The Latin Mass was restored, married clergy were forced to separate from their wives. It was a full-scale Catholic counter-revolution.
Did she try to reclaim the monastery lands that had been sold off?
No, and that was a shrewd political calculation. She knew that trying to force the gentry and nobility to give back the former church lands they'd bought would guarantee massive opposition and likely spark rebellion. So while she restored the church's authority, the lands stayed with their new owners. A pragmatic compromise.
But one decision she made proved incredibly unpopular, didn't it? Her marriage to Philip II of Spain in July 1554. Why was that such a bad move politically?
England was deeply suspicious of Spain. Philip was heir to the Spanish throne, the most powerful Catholic monarch in Europe. The English feared that this marriage would drag England into Spain's wars, subordinate English interests to Spanish ones, and lead to Spanish domination of the government. National pride and anti-Spanish sentiment were strong.
And this led to rebellion.
Yes, Sir Thomas Wyatt led a significant rebellion based in Kent, marching on London, specifically to protest the Spanish marriage. Although the rebellion was ultimately crushed, it showed the depth of anxiety and opposition to Mary's foreign policy. Even the official celebrations for Philip's arrival in England were reportedly quite coolly received by the London crowds. It damaged her popularity significantly.
Okay, so the Spanish marriage was unpopular. But what really cemented Mary's image in history, earning her that infamous nickname Bloody Mary, was the persecution of Protestants.
Yes, this is undeniably the defining feature of her reign in popular memory, and it's what overshadowed any potential successes. Starting in early 1555, her government revived the old medieval laws against heresy, and they began burning Protestants at the stake for refusing to renounce their faith.
How many people were killed?
The traditional figure is around 300 men and women over a period of about 3.5 years. Prominent figures like Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who annulled her parents' marriage, Bishops Latimer and Ridley, but also many ordinary artisans, tradespeople, farmers.
And these executions were very public, very deliberately staged.
Yes, they were meant to be terrifying public spectacles, designed to frighten people back into Catholicism, to show the horrific consequences of heresy. But the strategy completely backfired.
How so? It didn't work.
It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Instead of terrifying people into submission, the burnings often had the opposite effect. The bravery and steadfast faith shown by many of the martyrs as they faced agonizing deaths actually inspired admiration and sympathy. It horrified many onlookers, including some moderate Catholics who found the sheer brutality repulsive. It ended up hardening Protestant resistance rather than extinguishing it.
And this is where John Fox's book comes in, The Book of Martyrs.
Exactly. John Fox's Acts and Monuments, first published in English in 1563, just after Mary's death, became a publishing phenomenon. It vividly documented the stories of the Protestant martyrs, often with graphic woodcut illustrations of the burnings. It portrayed them as heroes of faith standing against tyranny. This book became second only to the Bible in popularity in English households for centuries. It did more than anything else to cement Mary's reputation as Bloody Mary and create a powerful Protestant narrative of suffering and resilience that profoundly shaped English identity. The burnings unintentionally created Protestantism's most potent propaganda weapon.
So the religious persecutions were a disaster for her image. What other problems did her reign face?
It was plagued by misfortune, really. Besides the unpopularity of the Spanish match and the backlash against the burnings, England suffered several years of disastrously bad harvest, leading to severe food shortages, famine, and rampant inflation. Disease outbreaks like influenza also swept the country. And then there was a major military and symbolic blow.
Losing Calais.
Yes. In January 1558, the French captured Calais, England's last remaining territory on the European mainland, held since the Hundred Years' War. It was a deep national humiliation, a huge blow to English pride. Mary herself supposedly said that when she died, Calais would be found engraved on her heart.
And personally, the biggest disappointment for her must have been her failure to have children. She had these false pregnancies.
Yes, 2 episodes in 1555 and 1557 where she believed she was pregnant. Her abdomen swelled, she stopped menstruating, she felt she could feel the baby move. The court even made preparations for the birth. But no baby ever arrived.
What do historians think was happening?
It's impossible to know for sure. It might have been pseudocyesis phantom pregnancy, possibly driven by her intense desire for an heir. Or it could have been related to a medical condition, perhaps ovarian cysts, or even uterine cancer, which might have caused the symptoms and ultimately contributed to her death. Whatever the cause, these failures were a source of immense personal anguish for Mary and created huge political uncertainty, as the succession remained dependent on her Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth.
Mary died in November 1558. She was only 42. Likely from illness, perhaps cancer. Her Catholic restoration was incomplete, and crucially, without an heir, the crown passed directly to Elizabeth. It's a profound historical irony, isn't it? The devout Catholic queen who had endured so much for her faith ultimately failed to secure its long-term future in England. Her actions, especially the burnings, arguably did more to strengthen Protestantism and pave the way for a decisively Protestant nation under her successor. 7th, Elizabeth I. The Virgin Queen and a Golden Age, 1558 to 1603. And so, the crown passes to Elizabeth, November 17th, 1558. She's 25 years old. Inheriting this kingdom that's just been through these violent religious swings under Edward and Mary, deeply divided, financially strained. What a daunting prospect, especially for a young woman whose own legitimacy had been questioned.
Absolutely daunting. But Elizabeth showed her political savvy right from the very beginning. Her first moves were incredibly shrewd. She appointed William Cecil, a known moderate Protestant who had served Edward but managed to survive Mary's reign, as her principal Secretary of State. That signaled her Protestant direction.
But she didn't just purge all the Catholics.
No, and this was crucial. She kept several prominent Catholic nobles on her Privy Council. This immediately signaled her intention to try and find a middle way, to avoid the extremes of her siblings. She understood instinctively that what England desperately needed was stability, not more religious upheaval. Religious stability, even if it meant some compromise on doctrinal purity, was her path to securing her throne and uniting the kingdom.
And this led to the cornerstone of her reign, the Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559. How did she manage to push that through, given the opposition she must have faced?
It wasn't easy. There was significant opposition, especially from the Catholic bishops appointed by Mary, who still sat in the House of Lords. But Elizabeth and Cecil skillfully navigated Parliament to pass two key pieces of legislation.
The Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity.
It's exactly. The Act of Supremacy re-established royal authority over the Church of England, essentially reversing Mary's reconciliation with Rome. But Elizabeth made a subtle yet brilliant change in title. Instead of Supreme Head, which her father had used, and which many felt was inappropriate for a woman, she took the title Supreme Governor.
What was the difference?
It was less theologically provocative, appeasing those who believed Christ alone could be head of the church, while still giving her effective control. A masterclass in political compromise.
And the Act of Uniformity, what did that do?
That re-established Protestant worship based on a modified version of Edward VI's Second Book of Common Prayer. It mandated its use in every parish church across England. But again, it included compromises.
Like?
The wording around communion allowed for broader interpretation, potentially acceptable to both Protestants and more traditionalist worshippers. It also permitted certain traditional vestments and church ornaments to be retained, which appeased conservatives and prevented the church from looking too radically bare and reformed, unlike some Calvinist churches on the continent.
So it was deliberately ambiguous in places.
Deliberately ambiguous, designed to be a compromise that most people could, perhaps grudgingly, live with. Elizabeth famously said she had no desire to make windows into men's souls. She didn't necessarily care what people privately believed, Catholic or Protestant, so long as they were loyal, subjects outwardly conforming to her settlement. This pragmatic approach, focusing on outward conformity and loyalty rather than inner conviction, was key to achieving relative religious peace for much of her reign. It was a stroke of political genius.
But that stability was constantly under threat, wasn't it? Primarily from one person, Mary, Queen of Scots. Why was she such a persistent problem for Elizabeth?
Mary Stuart was a triple threat. One, she was Elizabeth's cousin with a legitimate claim to the English throne herself through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor, Henry VII's daughter. Two, she was Catholic. Three, many Catholics, especially abroad, considered Elizabeth illegitimate because the Pope had never recognized Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn. So for them, Mary was the rightful Queen of England.
A living alternative claimant.
Exactly. A potent symbol and potential figurehead for anyone wanting to overthrow Elizabeth and restore Catholicism. And then, in 1568, Mary made things even more complicated by fleeing Scotland. After a series of scandals and rebellions forced her abdication, she sought refuge in England.
Putting Elizabeth in an impossible position.
Completely impossible. If Elizabeth helped Mary regain her Scottish throne, she risked antagonizing the Protestant Scottish lords. If she let Mary go to France, Mary could plot against her from there. If she kept Mary in England, she became a prisoner, but also a dangerous magnet for Catholic plots right on English soil. Elizabeth chose the latter, keeping Mary under house arrest for the next 19 years.
19 years. And Mary did become the focus of plots.
Repeatedly. Her presence fueled Catholic resistance, like the Northern Rebellion in 1569. Then in 1570, Pope Pius V issued that papal bull, Regnans in Excelsis, which excommunicated Elizabeth, declared her deposed, and actively encouraged Catholics to overthrow her, even permitting assassination. This raised the stakes dramatically.
Turning loyal Catholics into potential traitors in the eyes of the state.
Precisely. It led to a series of increasingly dangerous plots aimed at assassinating Elizabeth and putting Mary on the throne, often with Spanish support. The Ridolfi plot in 1571, the Throckmorton plot in 1583. Elizabeth's spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham, was kept very busy uncovering them.
Until finally the Babington plot in 1586.
Yes. Walsingham intercepted coded letters between Mary and Anthony Babington, which provided undeniable proof that Mary had explicitly approved of a plan to assassinate Elizabeth. This time there was no escape.
Elizabeth had to act.
Her counselors pressured her relentlessly. Mary was put on trial, found guilty of treason, and sentenced to death. But Elizabeth agonized over signing the death warrant. Executing an anointed queen, her own cousin, set a terrifying precedent. She delayed, prevaricated. But eventually, on February 8, 1587, Mary was executed at Fotheringhay Castle. It was a decision that reportedly haunted Elizabeth for the rest of her life, but politically it removed the single greatest threat to her throne.
And the very next year, 1588, comes another defining moment, the Spanish Armada. Philip II of Spain finally launches his great invasion fleet.
Yes, the culmination of years of deteriorating relations, fueled by religious conflict, English piracy against Spanish ships, think Francis Drake, and English support for Dutch rebels fighting against Spanish rule. Philip's massive, invincible armada aimed to sail up the Channel, pick up Spanish troops from the Netherlands, invade England, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism by force.
But it famously failed. How did the English manage to defeat such a huge fleet?
A combination of factors. The English ships, though smaller, were generally faster and more maneuverable, with better long-range cannons. English commanders like Drake, Hawkins, and Howard employed effective tactics, harrying the Spanish fleet up the Channel, using fire ships to break their formation at Calais. And then, crucially, the weather played a huge part.
The Protestant wind.
Exactly. As the damaged armada tried to sail home around the north of Scotland and Ireland, terrible storms wrecked many ships. It was seen in England as divine intervention, proof that God favored the Protestant cause and Elizabeth's rule. The victory was a massive boost to English morale and national pride, cementing Elizabeth's image as a protector of her people, a divinely favored leader.
And this period, especially after the Armada, is often seen as a kind of golden age, isn't it? A flourishing of culture.
It really was. The relative stability Elizabeth provided, combined with growing national confidence and prosperity from trade and exploration, created fertile ground for the arts. It was the era of Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spenser writing epic poetry like The Faerie Queene, celebrating Elizabeth, Francis Bacon laying groundwork for modern science. A distinctly English Renaissance, a time of incredible literary and dramatic output.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing in her later years, was it? You mentioned economic problems.
No, the later years brought significant challenges. Long, costly wars, especially the 9 Years' War trying to suppress rebellion in Ireland, drained the treasury. That campaign alone cost maybe £2 million, a colossal sum. Inflation was rising, bad harvests hit hard, and popular resentment grew over monopolies, exclusive rights granted by the Queen to courtiers to sell certain goods, which pushed up prices. Elizabeth even had to sell off crown lands to raise money, a sign of the financial strain.
And the court atmosphere changed, too, became more fractious, the Earl of Essex.
Yes, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. He was her last great favorite, young, charismatic, ambitious, but also unstable and reckless. He failed spectacularly in Ireland, then returned against orders and eventually staged a foolish, ill-planned rebellion in London in 1601.
And Elizabeth.
She had no choice but to act decisively. Essex was tried for treason and executed. It was another personally agonizing decision for the aging queen, executing her former favorite. It seemed to mark a more somber end to her reign.
She herself was physically declining, too, wasn't she? Maintaining that image of the Virgin Queen must have been harder. The stories about her wigs, heavy makeup, removing mirrors.
Yes, she remained fiercely protective of her image, her mask of youth, even as she aged. Reports mention her owning thousands of elaborate dresses, yet being reluctant to look at her own reflection. But beneath the carefully constructed public persona, the question of the succession loomed large. She never publicly named an heir.
But behind the scenes, plans were being made.
Yes. Her chief minister, Robert Cecil, William Cecil's son, was secretly corresponding with James VI of Scotland, the Protestant son of Mary, Queen of Scots, ensuring that when Elizabeth finally died, the transition would be smooth.
And she died on March 24th, 1603. She was 69, had been on the throne for 44 years.
A remarkably long reign for the era. And her greatest final achievement, perhaps, was that peaceful transition. James VI of Scotland became James I of England without bloodshed, without conflict. The Tudor Dynasty, born in the chaos and violence of Bosworth, ended not with chaos, but with order. A truly remarkable legacy for the daughter Henry VIII never expected to rule. 8th, the enduring Tudor legacy, shaping a nation's identity. So we followed this incredible journey 118 years, just 5 monarchs, but their impact on England was just immense. They didn't just rule. They fundamentally reshaped the country's religion, its power structures, its whole sense of identity.
It's quite something when you list the transformations. Royal supremacy over the church, that break from Rome, was monumental, centralizing government power, really taming that overmighty nobility that caused the Wars of the Roses, creating a new landowning class, loyal to the crown because of those dissolved monastery lands, and under Elizabeth especially, fostering this distinct English national identity separate from continental Europe.
And that peaceful handover to the Stuarts in 1603, that was the final Tudor achievement in a way. James VI of Scotland had the best claim through his great-grandmother, Margaret Tudor, who was Henry VIII's daughter.
Right, keeping it in the extended family.
Exactly. And the fact that the transition happened so smoothly, without any real challenge, was remarkable. Think back to the chaos and bloodshed of Bosworth that brought the Tudors to power. Ending the dynasty with such stability was a testament, particularly to Elizabeth's long reign and careful planning behind the scenes.
But James I, even though he inherited a stable kingdom, he also inherited some tricky issues, didn't he? The relationship between the monarch and Parliament, for instance.
Yes, the Tudors, especially Henry VIII and Elizabeth, had often managed Parliament through sheer force of personality or political skill. But the underlying questions about power, who really held ultimate authority, the monarch or Parliament, were still unresolved. James I came in with very strong ideas about the divine right of kings.
Believing God put him there and Parliament should basically do as he said.
Pretty much. That attitude was bound to cause friction, and it certainly did. It set the stage for the growing conflicts between Crown and Parliament that would eventually explode into civil war under his son, Charles I. So the Tudor legacy included stability, but also some simmering, unresolved constitutional tensions.
And culturally, did things change under James?
Yes, there was a shift. The intense, almost uniquely English Renaissance flavor of Elizabeth's reign perhaps gave way to more continental European influences in art and architecture. But James was also a great patron of scholarship. His most famous legacy in that area is surely the King James Bible, authorized in 1611.
An incredible influence on the English language itself and a cornerstone of Protestant identity for centuries.
Absolutely. And the era also saw the rise of scientific inquiry really taking off, with figures like Francis Bacon championing empirical observation and systematic investigation. It was pushing England toward the new age of science and discovery, building on the foundations the Tudors had laid.
So by 1603, England is really at a turning point. It's no longer this insecure island nation constantly fighting for survival, but looking outwards, engaged in global exploration, trade, ready for a different kind of future.
Exactly. The Tudors, through all their turmoil, their personal dramas, their ruthless pragmatism, had forged a stronger, more centralized, more self-confident nation. That legacy, the religious settlement, however contested it remained, the centralized state, the burgeoning national identity, the economic potential, that was the foundation the Stuarts inherited. It was on that Tudor foundation that they would eventually build a united British state and, in time, a global empire. The echoes of those 5 Tudor monarchs, their choices and their accidents, are still with us today.
What an absolutely incredible story. When you think about it, so many of those huge, nation-shaping changes, the break with Rome, the rise of Parliament's importance, even in resisting the monarch, the shifts in wealth and power were so often driven by really personal things. Scandals, love affairs, and above all, that relentless, obsessive pursuit of a male heir. It almost feels like the major currents of Tudor history were just a series of profound, unexpected accidents stemming from very human desires and fears.
It's deeply paradoxical, isn't it? Think about the sheer effort, the cost in lives and upheaval that went into securing a male heir, especially under Henry VIII. Yet where did England ultimately find its greatest stability, its most iconic moments, its so-called golden age?
Under its powerful female monarchs, Elizabeth I, obviously. But even Mary I's difficult reign, in a way, paved the path for Elizabeth's success by showing the dangers of religious extremism.
Exactly. The very outcome Henry VIII spent decades trying to avoid female rule turned out to be crucial for the dynasty's long-term success and England's flourishing. What does that tell us about history? About how little control we sometimes have over the consequences of our actions?
That's a fascinating thought to end on. How do these incredibly personal, often ruthless, sometimes accidental stories from 500 years ago continue to shape how we think about power, leadership, religion, and national identity even now? Something for you to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.